Hello YouTube, this is Dick152. So I had a couple of requests for updates to the Radiation Zone Toolbox. Um, and so I went ahead and implemented those, and I just wanted to give a quick demo of them. The two requests, one was a better ramp up of dosage value. So essentially you get a nice smooth curve from entering this edge here up to the inner zone. Um, so let me just, that is now controlled. So if you look over here, I added a ramp factor. So if this value is really low, you get a nice smooth curve. So you'll get a very small value when you first enter, and then it'll ramp up really quickly when it gets to the inner zone. And then if you increase that value, you'll get a more abrupt jump. So you'll get a smoother inclination, a little more linear, a linear curve. And then I also added an agitation. That was the next request. So I have an agitation interval. So it'll go from between this min and max, and then that interval it randomly picks between. So it'll pick a random value in between these two values, and then that's the time. That's how often it will do the agitation. And then the agitation range is from and to again. So you have from a random value in between here that it'll pick, that it'll agitate it towards. So your original value, so whether it's in an isolation zone, it would be this background dosage value, and in this case, from every half second to 1.5 seconds, so some value in between those inclusive, it will ramp it plus or minus a value in between these, and it randomly toggles between adding or subtracting to this original background dosage. So you'll see in a minute when I actually run it. And then, so that was pretty much it. There were a couple of bug fixes, some bugs that I found that I'd been wanting to get taken care of, and I've got that done. And that'll all be in the upgrade notes. So when you get the update from the asset store, it'll be in the update notes of what was fixed. So let's get right to it. So essentially, what you can see is the background. So I'm in the isolation zone right now, and you can, if you watch the dosage value here, you'll see that it's kind of bouncing around a little bit. And you can control how frequently that does by changing the interval. So if, in your isolation zone or in your radiation zone, if you change this interval value, it will adjust how frequently it does that. So if you want it to bounce around a lot, more often, you can do that, and you can change it down to a closer interval. So it'll, like in this case, it'll do it fairly frequently. And because it's randomly adding or subtracting, you could have multiple subtracts or adds. So it's a lot more realistic than it was. It's not just sitting at a constant dosage now. Okay, so as we approach here, we've now passed the datum in this sphere. So if you look at the sphere here, we've passed this datum. So now we're actually getting radiation values on here. So you can see that now the downside is when you come from the datum, it's a pretty abrupt change. The value beyond the datum is 0. The value here on the datum, it depends on how close you are. So like if I jump in here, it's fairly quick. That can't really be helped, unfortunately, just because of the nature of how the calculations work. So if you were to go across the datum like right here, you would go from nothing and then all of a sudden really into it. It's just the nature of the way it is. Now you could add other zones around here. You can, because they're additive, so you could add other zones and make it a little bit smoother of a transition. But so it's just a matter of how you put all these together. But let's look back at that. Okay, so you can see that it'll start creeping up a lot faster as you get close. Change it to microsieverts or millisieverts, sorry. So you get a much more smooth ramp. A much smoother ramp up to it and ramp down. A really good one to illustrate it is this ramp zone here. And the ramp zone is also where I fixed one of the bugs, and I'll describe that in just a second. So right about now, we're entering it. So you can see, even on microsieverts, it's a really gradual increase, ramp up to it. So it's almost flat at the beginning. But now, the same thing, we're just inside it a little bit. So we'll just be a tiny bit inside. And what we'll do is go to the function. So you can see that we're in there a pretty decent ways. So if we change this function up to something a little higher, say at 0.5, you can see now we've really jumped on our readings. We're at 2.5 millisieverts versus if we set it back down to 0.1, it's not even reading any millisieverts. So it's down in the lower microsievert range. So that has a tremendous difference or a tremendous effect on how that ramp happens. So 0.1 is a really good smooth curve, so a really low value. 0.3 is pretty good too. You get a fairly decent reading on the microsieverts. It doesn't jump too terribly badly. When you come down, like at the really small values, the grays, in the millirims or microrims, it's still fairly smooth. So at any rate, so you can just adjust that for how smooth you want it. So the other issue that I was talking about, the bug that I fixed, was at the end of the background zone. So as soon as you leave the isolation zone, if you look at that, so now we're almost at the datum here, and our Geiger counter is just about to leave the isolation zone. So the isolation zone ignores the background zone. And the background zone is where we have the really high radiation dosage. And so what happens is when you leave the isolation zone, it would say, okay, now start actually reading the background zone. Well, I'm in a ramp zone, so I wasn't ignoring the background zone while I was in a ramp zone before. And so what was happening is it would be okay until you pass this datum, but as soon as you pass the datum, then it would add the value from the ramp zone to the background zone, and instead of having 10,000 millisieverts here inside this the hot zone of the ramp zone, you would get 20, and then as soon as you would exit the ramp zone, then it would go back down to the 10, which is the ambient radiation for the being inside the background zone. So I fixed that. So now this is aware. If you're inside this zone, then it will ignore the background zone the same way it does inside the isolation zone. So now, you go to 10,000. So yeah, and inside the ramp zone, it does even past the datum, it will agitate the value a little bit. But once you get out into the ramp zone, I have this particular one. I actually have it set to not. So you can set the background zone. I have it set to add dosage agitation interval to 0. And if that's 0, then it won't agitate the dosage. So let me demo that real quickly. You can see that I'm agitating the dosage here. So if I pause it and I go over here to the isolation zone, if I turn off the max interval, so set that to 0, then it won't agitate it. It'll just leave it wherever it's set. So anyway, so it gives you a little bit of control over that, and it gives you some good control over the ramp, the ramp factor. But anyway, if you have any questions, please post them down in the comment section, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Also, if you own the asset, or if you see it on the asset store, you can go to the forum and post any kind of requests or bugs. Bug notifications, anything like that that you want on the forum. That's stick152.com/forum, I believe it is. And stick152.com//forum, and that'll take you to there. But anyway, I hope this was helpful, and hope you guys are enjoying the asset.